Okay, today we're going to decode Silicon Valley. This is Roger Royse. I'm the founder of the Royse Law Firm. Welcome to our webinar series. We're taking a little bit of a departure from our series on the gig economy to talk about the book, The Insider's Guide to Decoding Silicon Valley, written by Michelle Messina and Jonathan Baer. Again, I'm Roger Royse, founder of the Royse Law Firm. This is part of a webinar series. If you're tweeting today, tweet to hashtag Decoding Silicon Valley. You can also tweet to us directly at Royse University. This webinar is being recorded. You'll be able to find it on the Royse Law YouTube site, the Royse University webinar page, and it will be available for download as a podcast in the iTunes bookstore. Before we get started, just want to remind everybody that this is part of a series that we do here on webinars, and we've got 2 more coming up this year before the end of the year, the end of the season. The 4th in our series on the gig economy, we're going to focus on employment law issues, which are going to be more and more important as the law evolves and develops. There's been some real developments in the law and some things to come. So that's employment law issues in the gig economy. That's on October 19. Mark your calendar. Then November 21, disaster response and recovery. We've got a panel, a multidisciplinary panel of experts from a variety of fields on what to do in the event of a disaster. That's coming up on November 21st. So for today, we are going to talk about the book, Decoding Silicon Valley, The Insider's Guide. And just looking at before I introduce our speakers, I just want to mention that I have taken a look at the book, and I was just looking at the reviews of this. Here are some of the reviews on Amazon. Awesome interviews, great insights, easy to read, and very straightforward messages, no BS whatsoever. Another review, 5 stars, an excellent introduction to the people and ideas that make Silicon Valley run. Another review, great complex book about startup worlds. For sure, not only for people from Silicon Valley, I recommend it to everyone who has or is planning to have a startup, and they go on and on and on like that. So you certainly have gotten great reviews on this book. Our 2 speakers are the 2 authors of the book. Jonathan Baer is an executive who has been a venture capitalist and the founder and CEO of 2 venture-backed companies. eBoomerang is one of the muscle is the other. Previously, he was general partner at Osco Ventures, a Sand Hill Road, early stage venture capital, and he is invested in a range of companies that you've probably heard about. Michelle Messina is an entrepreneur, author, board member, and strategist. She is in the business of decoding best practices in Silicon Valley. She helps startups find sustainable business models, catalyzes the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and teaches startup portfolio management best practices. She works particularly in emerging markets, including transitional economies, and she has worked in more than 25 countries and listened to thousands of pitches. So those are our 2 authors. This is our book, and I'm going to turn it over to you with and by the way, you'll notice there's a dialog box on your screen. In the mobile version at the bottom of your screen. So if you have questions, go ahead and type in your questions as we go along, and we'll go ahead and take those throughout the hour or possibly at the end of the hour. But I'm going to start things off and just allow you, my 2 authors, to tell us a little bit about who you are.
So my name is Michelle Messina, and I have worked all over the world. I've actually worked in about 40 countries now, and I'm really interested in helping people understand how Silicon Valley is organized and how they can be successful with a lot of the best practices here. So together with John, we've done just hundreds of talks and workshops and master classes around the world for startups, helping them leverage the best practices of Silicon Valley.
And I'm John Baer. I'm a recovering venture capitalist. I too am working with startups all over the world, training entrepreneurs, training mentors, training early stage investors. What I particularly like about working with entrepreneurs is that I'm bringing the perspective not only of somebody who has made investment decisions and invested in companies, but also as the founder and CEO of 2 venture-backed companies, been on the side of looking for capitals, dealing with the challenges and struggles of working with startup companies, but also now having worked with Michelle in all over the world, gotten to see both the opportunities and challenges that entrepreneurs face as they try and grow their businesses and try and figure out how to best utilize Silicon Valley and put Silicon Valley in the right perspective.
Okay, great. We've all read lots of business books. It's great to see a book that's focused just on Silicon Valley, because there's been a lot of talk and discussion about what makes this place special and why here and not someplace else, because everybody wants to be the next Silicon Valley. And I gather what you're going at is just exactly down at the functional level as to how everything works. But how did you decide what to put in the book and what to write about? And in particular, and I actually have looked at the book. I know you think I didn't, but I did. And I noticed you go into great detail on a lot of these just very practical sorts of things, like how to do a pitch, for example. How did you decide what should go in the book?
I think that since John and I are both entrepreneurs and we work with entrepreneurs, we wanted a resource that's going to be relevant and helpful for them. I originally drafted the outline for this book in 2009, and it sat on the shelf for a really, really long time. And then I revised the outline and had to bring in a co-founder or co-author to do this book because I wasn't going to do it myself. And through a long series of processes of writing, revising, having external reviewers take a look at the book, we enhanced it with subject matter that we hadn't considered early on in the process. So some of our outside reviewers said, you need to include this, this, and this. Some of the reviewers said, that's irrelevant, you should take it out. And so our process was one of making sure that as entrepreneurs, we were putting in information that's valuable to them. But then we went out to the market, to our reviewer group, to figure out what they felt was relevant to entrepreneurs as well. So that was part of the editing and the modification process of the content.
So, and part of it was really having worked with entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, throughout the United States and around the world, we saw firsthand the challenges they had in terms of their understanding of Silicon Valley, the understanding of Silicon Valley best practices for those entrepreneurs who were looking to raise capital in Silicon Valley, to network in Silicon Valley, to get customer traction here. We understood the issues and challenges that they were facing, and we tried to give them perspective. We tried to give them practical, hands-on guidance and suggestions on how best to navigate, and help them really understand not what you read in some of the books about sort of the crazy things that happen in Silicon Valley, but really give them an understanding of, so how do you navigate? What is typical? What most often happens in Silicon Valley? And it's a little different than the HBO TV show.
Yeah, it sure is. It's kind of, again, it's very practical, kind of nuts and bolts sort of advice here. I notice you've taken a perspective of like a stranger to the Valley, I think an offshore startup coming into the Valley. Why did you look at it that way in particular?
So, we look, the people who read the book and get value out of the book, we've had lots of people in the Valley who've been here 30 plus years who've read the book and said, wow, this gives me insight and perspective and puts things in context. We've had a lot of first-time entrepreneurs who've read the book. We've had a lot of people from outside the Valley and outside the country read the book as well. But we felt by giving the perspective of somebody who really didn't necessarily grow up here and hasn't been through 10 startups, by giving them that perspective, it helped people really understand the things that even people who've been here don't necessarily think about. As one example, so often meetings here happen in cafes and coffee shops. And the question is, why? Most people have offices. Why are those meetings held there? And really not only understanding the things that are here, the buildings, the experiences, but understanding and uncovering the things that people don't necessarily understand, and that often trip up people from outside the region. The way we do business here, the values we have, the way we communicate are a little different here than other parts of the United States or other parts of the world.
The other thing that I would add is that we have some excellent universities here, UCSF, Stanford, Berkeley, and those universities attract thousands and thousands and thousands of students every year, and many of them come from overseas. So it adds to the diversity that we have in Silicon Valley, all the different languages and cultures, the fact that nearly half the population is born in another country that lives in the greater Silicon Valley area. So we have a tremendous amount of diversity, people that have been here for a relatively short period of time, and while they have integrated into the culture and they're working and things like that, there's certain things that they may not know or learn or understand until you've been here for a little while and observed behaviors, ways of speaking, ways of dressing, ways of acting that sort of reflect some of the culture here. So since we do have so much diversity here, and there is a constant stream of new young students that come to study, many stay and build their companies here, it's a prime target for the constant variety and diversity that we have here in Silicon Valley. So we took that perspective because we just know there's so many international visitors here.
Well, isn't that the truth? I would say that even in our law practice, I used to say that more than half our clients were from someplace else. I think pretty much all of them are from someplace else, and most of them are from other countries. I didn't realize half the population was from another country, but that makes sense. I believe it. It really is an international place where people come from all over the world. So John, following up on something that you just said about how we kind of communicate a little bit differently here, how important is, I'm going to key in on one thing that you talk about a lot in the book, and that's networking. And how important is that, and what's the right way to do this?
Okay, so, and that's, people often believe that Silicon Valley, the importance of Silicon Valley is all the money here, all the venture capital, all the early stage seed and angel money. And there's certainly a lot of it here. There's more here than anywhere else in the world. But the simple fact is that one of the key things that makes Silicon Valley so unique is the networking that goes on here. To build a curated network, to find people who can help you, to find your path to the right people is something that is evolved into a real science here. There are events that go on every day of every week, and people, some people are very good at networking and others are not. So, the question of how do you network? Well, let me tell you how you don't network. By just going into a room and handing out business cards, shaking people's hands, and then asking for a LinkedIn connection, or worse than that, just randomly going and asking people for a LinkedIn connection. The Valley works on the basis of quid pro quo, and finding people who can be of assistance to you, finding people that you can help, and building those relationships and building those networks is really something that requires time. It requires understanding how there's a good exchange of value, and it also requires being here for more than one day or 1 week or 1 month.
But the other comment that I'll make is you can't get anything done here unless you know people. You can't connect to prospective customers, a service provider, get feedback on your presentation before you start your fundraising strategy. You can't get anything done here unless you know people. And knowing people means connecting, going to events and activities. Then it means sharing something of value for the other person, this exchange of value, this quid pro quo. It means being trustworthy. It means being here for some period of time. It means following through on what you say you're going to do. All these things build trust and credibility and help open the doors for a newcomer into a network of people here. But then the curated network side that John's mentioned is really managing and maintaining that network on a regular basis, staying in touch with people, not just, we met last night at a networking event, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be back in 6 months, I'd love to see you then. It means maintaining contact and communication with people within reason, not overloading them every week with something, an email or an update on the company. But a curated network is about people who understand what you do, what your value is, and think of you when an opportunity arises that you might be able to fulfill. And conversely, your job too, if you want to build a curated network with the right people in Silicon Valley, understanding what type of law, for example, Royse practices, what type of clients that you want to be connected to, what size of companies at what stage, keeping that forefront in my mind allows me to do a better job of referring clients to you that fit your sweet spot.
Right.
So, but there's one last element of building that curated network. It's the element of trust. And I think that's so important. We build a network, but we build a curated network among people we know and we trust. And that's, as you know, Roger, is really important. Whether you're a lawyer, you're an entrepreneur, you're a venture capitalist, you need to know people, but you also need to trust them.
Right. So bringing us back to the startups a little bit more, and this is all great advice for me and service providers and trusted professionals. For our startup community, everybody, I like to say that when you come to Silicon Valley, you're looking for one of three things. It's either money, or you're looking for the market, or you're looking for the technology, maybe for people. But it seems most of the people that come here in the startup world are looking for money. They know that most of the venture capital is located here, and I see so many companies that come here. It's like American Idol. They all think they're going to be the next unicorn, and it's going to be really easy, and they just need to show up and go to some of these networking events, and people are going to throw money at them, right? And the vast majority of them become very disappointed, and they go home without anything. What advice can we give to people that are coming here just to find financing?
So raising capital is not easy. You're absolutely right. Raising money when you don't need it is actually the easiest time to raise it. Being thoughtful about how much money you raise, who you raise money from is important. As you know, Roger, in the venture capital business in Silicon Valley has evolved over the last multiple decades. And in fact, investors tend to be much more specialized in terms of what they will invest in, when they will invest, the technologies or the market sectors they're interested in. And so very often I get the question that I'm sure you do as well, which is introduce me to a venture capitalist, which of course is the wrong question. The right question to be asking, or the right request, is introduce me to a venture capitalist who would be interested in investing in my company and knows my business, and there's a good fit. And finding that fit is actually more of an art than a science. One of the things that I always encourage companies who are coming here to do is find the best lawyer they can't afford, because in fact they can. Finding a lawyer who understands their business, who believes in them, who's very often the law firms are willing to work on the terms of payment, particularly for early stage companies. But the lawyers, the other service providers, really, if they take you on as a client, if they believe in what you're doing, will give you some of that advice and counsel, will help you extend your network. Doesn't mean you as an entrepreneur still don't have a lot of work to do, but those introductions can help you find the right investors.
Michelle, do you have anything to add to that?
My only other comment to add on to John's would be that frequently we work with international entrepreneurs in their home country who want to come to Silicon Valley just for financing, and have no intention of developing the market here. And if I were an investor, I would love to have much closer access to my investment and my money, rather than having the company turn around and go back to their home market and build their business there. So our advice would be you've got to be focused on being successful in the U.S. market with customers and partnerships, and it makes you much more of an attractive company to invest in by a venture capitalist.
And you know, the venture capital business is a business that's really a handcraft business, particularly at the early stages. And as an entrepreneur, you really want a good investor or a good investor syndicate who's going to help you, who's going to be close enough that you can have face-to-face meetings, who can introduce you to customers, to other investors, to people who can help you either as employees or board members. And so particularly at the early stages for companies, finding investors who are more local generally works best for the investors, but it also works better for the entrepreneur.
Ah, interesting. You know, you use the phrase "go big or go home" in your book, and I wonder, because in other parts of the world, one thing I noticed, especially in that local part, is a lot of companies are just very, very focused on solving some local problem, and maybe they're focused on something very small. And I've always heard that VCs, they want to see world-changing ideas, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, as the type of ideas that usually win here, and what kind of companies? And I mean, I remember hearing Steve Jobs one time dismissing the company because they were a product, not a company. I think that was Hotmail. but can you talk a little bit about that attitude?
So I'll start. I think one of the things that's important to note is that entrepreneurs are everywhere, and they're successful all around the world. I think the go big or go home mentality that we have here in Silicon Valley is the fact that we focus on very large markets, very large opportunities, disruption in the markets, businesses that are going to go global. But what we see around the world is a lot of really sharp entrepreneurs building very interesting companies focused on a local or regional market. Some of those have the potential to go global. Not all of them do, but some of them really do have the potential to go global. And if they are interested in being a global company and expanding their business accordingly, then it might make sense to come to Silicon Valley and immerse themselves in this mindset of build a big global business. And you have all the resources here that you need to do that, whether it be service providers, investors, all the different things that we have here, all the different support resources we have for entrepreneurs here, but we're all of the mindset of we want to build a big business. So the go big or go home is a little bit of a mindset. It's a little bit of the support infrastructure and ecosystem that we have here. It's how we look at businesses. It's a little bit about our attitudes and our culture. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong whatsoever with building a local business in, Western Africa, for example, that's going to, eventually compete throughout the entire African continent. So it's just a different mindset here, really.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we encourage companies to do is to find opportunities, if it's outside Silicon Valley, outside the U.S., to get local traction, get customers, learn how to sell, learn all the things that can and will go wrong when you first release your product, and build a track record of understanding your market, building a business And then if there are other markets, recognize that they may be different. How you sell may be different. The product features and functions may also be different. And keep that in mind as you think about scaling the business. As you know, Roger, a lot of companies from outside the U.S. come to and look at the U.S. market and say, wow, this is a really large market opportunity. That's the good news. The bad news is that it's a big, complex marketplace, and having enough understanding of where to start, doing it in an effective and cost-efficient manner is important. Understanding the regional differences in the United States. We have companies who come to us and say, well, we're interested in coming to Silicon Valley, and we're selling to the insurance industry or financial services, and it turns out for most of those customers are really not going to be located in Silicon Valley. They're going to be located on the East Coast. So understanding how to go about building the market, understanding where you should be located, understanding how and when you're going to address different segments of the U.S. market really becomes important. So it's not only what you want to do, but how are you going to go about doing it.
I see. Okay. Let me ask, get a little bit more specific. I'd like to talk about, accelerators and mentors, maybe advisors as well, and how important they are to the whole formula, because it seems like there's a million accelerators out there and much different kinds of models as well. Is that a good thing? Should a company coming in here to this valley be looking at an accelerator, or are they better off going it alone?
So I think, and we get that question an awful lot from people, and we usually turn around and say, what do you need? What do you have? What are you looking to accomplish? If you've got a management team, you've got your product, you've got customer traction, and in wherever you're located, then what do you expect to get out of that incubator or accelerator? For companies where the team may not have significant experience, where they really are at an earlier stage in terms of their experience base, sometimes an incubator or an accelerator can be a very good place to get helpful advice and feedback, to get direction on where to focus in terms of customers, and potentially an introduction to a lot of early stage investors, which for every accelerator, everybody has a demo day. But for that, you're going to give up a significant portion of equity. And the question is, does that make sense? Is it meet with what your real needs are? We've worked with companies who've been in accelerators and have been successful. We've met companies who've been in accelerators, and not everybody, there's somebody who graduates at the bottom of the class of Harvard and Stanford, and the same thing with an incubator or accelerator. There's some companies who are really at the bottom. So being in an accelerator or incubator will not guarantee you success. The thing we think is more important, or what companies should really be thinking about, regardless of whether they're an incubator or an accelerator, is identifying mentors, people who can give them good advice and counsel, people who can help them expand their network, people who can ask them good questions and challenge them. And we think that's really important for companies throughout their life cycle.
I would comment that the value of accelerators to a lot of startups is that they have a built-in network and it's a built-in community. And so that shared experience from a community perspective, so the startup having a shared experience on the path of building their company and being around other founders who are doing the same thing, is very valuable, because entrepreneurs learn a tremendous amount from one another. The network of service providers, of investors, of, the curated network of the accelerator is certainly of value to a startup. And I think that the mentors, those that have been there, done it before, can provide some good guidance, advice, or most importantly, ask the right questions of the entrepreneur to help them, formulate their own decision. I think those are all of value. But I would say overall that with as many flavors of incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces, just in the greater Silicon Valley area, it's hard to differentiate between a lot of them right now.
Oh, really?
There's very few that I would say are very stand out, but in general, there is certainly a need in the marketplace for entrepreneurs that are seeking community, that are seeking network, that are also seeking inexpensive places to work as well. So I think they do provide value.
Okay. We talk a lot about disruption here in this valley and breaking rules and doing things differently and thinking differently. In fact, it seems that some of the most successful companies just completely, just done things entirely. I can think of a lot of examples, but how important is that to be disruptive and innovative and to think differently? And can you give me some good examples of companies that have been successful?
So it is important to think differently and to challenge the status quo in a business or a market. And, the examples are ones that we all are familiar with. Airbnb has challenged, the fact that everybody always stays in hotels. We look at other companies that have challenged the status quo. Michelle, what's another good example?
Uber, Salesforce.
Uber, right. So Uber certainly has challenged the status quo or the expectation, because for a lot of us, the experience of taking a taxi cab was getting into something that was smoke-filled and dirty and unreliable and expensive. And certainly, for many of us who are taking on-demand cabs, if you will, it's a very different experience today. And so thinking about not what is or what can be is really important. But I think the challenge we all have is, it's one thing to have a big audacious goal, to say we're going to reinvent, pick an industry, but and that's good. But the real question is, so what's your first step? What product are you going to build? Who's going to be your first customer? And so there really needs to be not only that big audacious goal, but there needs to be a clear path to fulfill that big audacious goal. So, Uber as an example, today their vision is that they're going to run a network 10, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years, 20 years from now, where it's going to be driverless cars. The product they introduced on day one. And so thinking about what you introduce, who are your first customers, who are your early adopters, and how do you create a business that you then can scale becomes a critical part in the equation.
Yeah, I think we, in Silicon Valley, we love big ideas and big visions. But the second question we always ask is, okay, so what have you done lately? So talk about your results. How have you executed? Where were you 6 months ago versus where you are today? So we love big vision, but we also want to see what has actually happened, what has actually transpired as part of the underpinnings of that big vision. So what has the entrepreneur executed upon?
So that's interesting that Uber's first product was not its end product. It kind of raises this issue about pivoting, and when a company should pivot and whether it should pivot. And I know there's a saying out here that you should fail fast, but at the same time, people have to be really tenacious and hang in there. Even in the face of a lot of resistance. any advice to our entrepreneurs about pivoting and changing and how flexible they really ought to be?
Well, it's pivoting a company is not an easy process. It's painful, it's difficult, it requires the founding team to be as objective as possible about what the data shows or doesn't show in their business, whether or not they're gaining traction or not. What is the market actually saying? So that process of being able to disconnect oneself emotionally from the business and be able to be objective about what the market's saying is not an easy process, because most entrepreneurs feel that their company is their baby. And, if you're looking at your baby and the market is saying your baby is not so pretty, your baby is kind of ugly, actually, and we're not, you've got to be able to take that feedback and figure out what is the next step in that process. So the decision to pivot is difficult. It takes time, but it requires a certain amount of objectivity, I think, to make it happen. And then the question is, what are you pivoting from and where are you pivoting to? That, again, is part of the whole process of trying to understand if it's not working here now, but we've got to go somewhere else, where is it that we go to? So then there's the process of trying to, make the case for that, get the board in agreement on that. So the whole process of pivoting it's just not easy, and I think every situation is a little bit different.
It's based on market feedback, you say?
Yeah, generally. I mean, you're gonna pivot if nobody's buying the product.
How about investor feedback? Because a lot of times I hear entrepreneurs, they go to the VCs and they'll talk to them and they won't get any money, but they'll get lots of advice. Should they take that advice typically?
So getting a lot of input as you are building your business is a good thing, but as an entrepreneur, you have to be selective in what advice you take, and just because somebody says it doesn't necessarily mean it's true, and that really ties back to the earlier question about pivoting. We believe that the whole process of growing and building a successful startup company is one of experimentation, of trying different things, seeing if they work. If they don't work, and recognize that things are hard. In a startup world, it could take 3 weeks to do something that in a large company can take you a day or two. So just because it's hard doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. But the objective of a startup is to try things, see if they can work. If they don't, try something else. And in that course, hopefully you will identify that correct product market fit. Ideally, you're going to identify the right business model. Ideally, you're going to identify the elements that you need to put together that can create a successful business. Ideally, you're doing all those things long before you raise significant amounts of capital from family and friends, from investors, because if you've done that experimentation, if you've really identified what doesn't work, and conversely what does work, you're going to be more likely to raise capital. You're going to be more likely to raise capital at a higher valuation, and you're unlikely to have too many ugly surprises along the way.
All right. I noticed in going through the book, you have a lot of interviews in here and quotes and discussions with a lot of very well-known people in the Valley. Any favorites that stand out?
So you're right. We did talk to a lot of people. It was wonderful,
We interviewed a couple dozen people that we thought would be helpful in reinforcing some of the things that we were writing about. My favorite one in particular is from Ann Winblad at Hummer Winblad, and she's been a venture investor for quite some time in Silicon Valley and has had some great successes, and she told us some stories of some catastrophic opportunities or failures on their part of deals that they missed investing in. But one of the things that she said that I really like is the hot breath of competition is a positive thing. In other words, if you have competition, that's really good. And the fact that they're breathing down your neck and forcing you to be a better product, a better company, a better go-to-market strategy is a good thing. So the hot breath of competition is a positive thing.
Wow, that's interesting, because one of the negative things I always hear is like, oh, it's such a crowded space, you know, which is sort of the same thing. There's a lot of people trying to get into it, a lot of competitors. But you're saying that's a good thing, maybe that.
Well, if you, just as you're a law firm, if you didn't have any competition, you probably wouldn't be as good a law firm as you are today.
Well,
so
that's very true. You know, we were talking about where I started practicing. I remember the town I was in, there was one lawyer, and he got starved to death, and a second lawyer moved into town, and they both got rich. So, so Ann Winblad, good. Okay, good quote. The hot breath of competition.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there are other pearls from the book as well. Joe Kennedy, who came in and successfully turned Pandora from a really not much of a company into a multi-billion-dollar IPO. You know, Joe, his quote was, "You need to know what you don't know. If you lack sufficient humility, people can save you from yourself." And I think that's really important. You know, being an entrepreneur is not easy. You do need to set big, audacious goals. You need to inspire people, but having that humility really is important. And we've seen examples, a number in the last 6 months, of entrepreneurs who've gotten ahead of themselves, who've overstated what they have, and those companies have crashed and burned. I just read that one company, Theranos, is now being sued by an investor who have put $100 million in the company. That's not a good place to be. No. You know, regardless of the merits, that's just not something you want to do as a founder, CEO of a company, to your reputation or the reputation of your company.
Although I will say in her defense, she did do what we do in Silicon Valley. She tried things, it didn't work. She tried something else, it didn't work. I guess the problem is you can do that in a startup environment much more easily than you can in an environment where you've got $100 million institutional investors, you know, with their lawyers parsing every line of the disclosures you've made to them.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that also makes Silicon Valley special. The investors who, many of the investors here were startup entrepreneurs themselves. They understand how hard it is to build a successful company. They discount some of those statements and big audacious goals that entrepreneurs make, and they recognize that things will go wrong, and understand that part of the entrepreneur's job and part of the good investor's job is to help the company work through when things don't go right, because that's really what happens most typically in a startup company. Some things go right, some things go wrong, and the good companies, the good management teams are the ones who figure out how to right the ship.
Yeah. And sometimes you're lucky.
And sometimes you're lucky.
So Phil Libin, the founder of Evernote, who is now a venture capitalist with General Catalyst Partners, he said, I attribute a ton of our success to luck. Everyone who's successful has been lucky. They've also been able to recognize opportunities and take action, but most of their success is still based on luck. And I've had a lot of entrepreneurs that 100% disagree with that. They don't believe in luck. They believe in preparedness for opportunities as they arise. So how you define luck is dependent on your perspective in life, but Phil Libin, the founder of Evernote, thinks that luck was a big factor in their success. So that's one of the quotes from the book as well.
Wow.
And Phil, of course, tells the story about almost running out of capital and really being lucky in being able to seize an opportunity.
With a customer that emailed in with a tech support question, he happened to see that, and the customer was very excited about the product and said, if you ever need investment, let me know. 20 minutes later, they were on a Skype call, and 2 weeks later, the customer had wired him $500,000.
Wow.
And that was over the weekend that Phil Libin was contemplating shutting down the company the following Monday, because this was during the financial crisis, and they were unable to get further follow-on funding.
Right.
So that was a little bit of luck, being able to see the tech support email, respond to it, and find an investor that gave them 6 months more runway.
Jeez, how about that? So the book is Decoding Silicon Valley, and when I first came out here to the Valley was kind of a different place geographically than it is now. So tell me, is San Francisco part of the Valley? And if it is it the same as Menlo Park, or is it different? Because I've seen it change over the years, definitely. I've seen the dynamic change, I've seen the companies change. And I know a lot of people, when they come here, you know, I've seen companies that end up in Pleasanton because they think they're in Silicon Valley, for example. But how important is it where the companies that come here actually physically locate in San Francisco or down here, and are they really different?
So the definition of the Valley, of the innovation hub on the West Coast, has expanded. It was the Valley, which was a relatively small defined geographic area, certainly when I moved here 30 years ago. But San Francisco, the East Bay, all the way up to Berkeley, all the way south to San Jose, really is, and even further south. I know you're involved with a lot of ag tech companies that are down in Salinas and the Central Valley. And so, you know, there's a lot of innovation happening generally in this area. And is there a right place to be located? No. There's a right place to be located for your company. It's where you're going to find people, where it's easy, where you're going to find customers, where the support infrastructure you need is available. Not that I'm going to encourage anybody to start a semiconductor or capital equipment company, but if you do, probably doing it close to the other companies in the Valley is probably a better thing to do than trying to do that in San Francisco. We see a lot of web, multimedia, social media kinds of companies located in San Francisco. You know, some of that is just the demographics of who's starting those kinds of companies.
And the access to the right employee base as well. So there's a lot of age demographics that want to live in the city, where they don't want to own a car and they want to, you know, be able to walk or bike or take public transportation. That age demographic, you know, tends to live in more, you know, more urban areas, and so that may be the people that want to work at Uber and Twitter and, you know, LinkedIn or Salesforce headquarters, that sort of thing. So I think it depends a little bit on, you know, what resources you need to build your company in the right way, where your customers are, and if that is a factor in where you physically locate. And then certainly, what's the cost to, you know, rent facilities and do business in that area? You know, the rents may be slightly lower in Redwood City than they are in San Francisco, but let's face it, Silicon Valley is a very expensive place to live, and you know, the traffic's getting worse, and it just, you know, it takes a lot more planning just to get through your day successfully, because of the amount of companies that come here and the just incredible economic success that we're having right now at this time.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's going to be outrageous, the rents wherever you are in this valley, I think. My sense is that it's just kind of a, like you said, it's kind of a younger crowd up in San Francisco that are a little bit more lifestyle focused. And it's like your rich uncle lives down here in Silicon Valley, so they might be a little mature. And startup companies are not lifestyle companies, are they?
No, they're not. No, they're not. We've worked a lot in Latin America, John and I, and there's a slightly different perspective to building a company there. There's a lot of the I want a legacy that I can leave for my children. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs there that tend to build companies with the intent of leaving them to their children or having their children come work in the business as they get older. We don't take that perspective here in Silicon Valley. We're very interested in, how do you build a big, scalable business in a sustainable manner, and that there's an exit for that business.
Yeah.
So we anticipate that the companies that are going to be successful are going to be sold at some point in time or acquire another company, and on much rarer occasions go public. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at those from growth mode companies. It goes back to what you said earlier about go big or go home. Mm-hmm. So we're not looking at lifestyle companies here. And the infrastructure, the attitudes, the behavior, the culture, everything is set up to help companies that are going global be successful.
So like that company, for example, that Latin American company, I gather you would not advise them to come to Silicon Valley.
Correct. We advise them to determine, where are the opportunities in their regional market, where and how can they grow, how can they partner down there, how can they perhaps extend their product line, how are they going to successfully transition from first generation to second generation within their family, what are the things that they can do locally and regionally that will help them be sustainable and successful economically over the long haul. So it's a lot of the same best business practices, but it's a slightly different approach.
So the companies that should come here really have a much bigger vision for what they're going to do. How do you know when they're ready to come here? Do they have to have profits and revenue and product and all of that stuff?
Well, again, it goes back to your earlier comment, or what are the reasons that they're coming to Silicon Valley? Uh-huh. Are they coming here for financing? Are they coming here to investigate and validate whether or not the U.S. is a market for them? Yeah. So it depends on what their reasons are for coming to Silicon Valley. If they're coming to relocate here for long term, then obviously they're looking at the U.S. market as a key factor in their growth strategy. So, the types of resources, meetings, connections, et cetera, that they need to have to establish their business here and grow it in a sustainable, scalable manner is going to be, there's going to be a certain types of things and people that they need to meet to make that happen.
Yeah. So, John, let me ask that a little differently from the investor standpoint, having been a VC, because I see this all the time, where a company overseas will do really well. They'll have success in their country. They'll have their app that everybody in, Tasmania loves. And they decide, look, we've proven that people will buy this. We've proven that they'll pay money for it. So now we're going to come and we're going to get into the U.S. market. And then the U.S. VC should love us because we're in the U.S. market. And we've proven that it works. We got traction. Everybody wants traction. We got traction. Is that a good model?
Maybe.
Yeah.
The U.S. is different. Sometimes the market is very different. Sometimes it's similar, but very often the nomenclature is different. The channels to market are different. The pricing is different. The partnerships you need are different. The competitive environment is different. And so just because you've built a successful business somewhere else does not necessarily mean you can build a successful business here. One of the things we find with companies who are building businesses in smaller markets is that in smaller markets, you tend to go to everybody. You tend to go to people you know. Everybody, it's a much broader brush in terms of who your market is. In the United States, because the competition is greater, because the market is so much larger, you need a much more targeted, focused strategy in terms of identifying customers, in terms of identifying how you're going to get to market. So the things that make you successful in a small market usually don't work in a large market. And so, understanding, recognizing that people have been successful, that's great. But then the question is, so what do you need to do differently? Who are the people who are going to be here? The team, the experience, the network, the execution that will allow you to build your success in the U.S. market.
And that's why they need folks like you, is to figure out how to scale that business, right, in a bigger market.
Exactly.
We help people. We help them through customer validation and market feedback. We help them think about, does this make sense? We help with introductions to potential key hires and help them better craft their presentation so that when they do go to a customer, when they do go to investor, they're more prepared.
Okay. So we got some questions from our audience in the last few minutes that we've got. A question about China. And the question is actually about, is it available in Chinese? But the bigger question is, boy, everything seems to be China in my business these days. We're seeing tons of Chinese money move into this market. Is there a strong Chinese Asian influence here in the Valley?
There absolutely is. And I think that it's going to continue to increase. We're seeing a lot more Chinese dollars invested in real estate here, whether it be commercial or residential, a lot more investment in companies here. So I think it's going to continue on. But the question actually is, when will our book be available in Chinese? And the answer is, it's going to take about a year. We're about ready to sign the contract with the publisher in the next week or two, but it does take about a year to translate the book, proofread it, and then get it out into the market. So I really, I'm going to guesstimate it's going to be January of 2018, believe it or not. So it does take time to translate a book into Chinese and get it through the book distribution systems there.
Holy cow, how about that? So I want to remind folks that if you do have questions, there's a dialog box. If you're on the web version, it's in the lower right-hand corner. On your mobile version, it's in the bottom of the screen. If you have a question, go ahead and type it in. This program is recorded. It's going to be available for playback at royseuniversity.com webinars, also on the Royse Law YouTube site, and available for download as a podcast in the iTunes bookstore. We're sort of coming to the end here, and I just want to close with, maybe you could give us your comments on what it takes to make a successful entrepreneur, and just as pithy as we can be based on all of the great quotes you've got and the good interviews. What are the traits of a successful entrepreneur company in this valley?
Look, being smart, identifying problems and figuring out a better way to solve that problem, being incredibly resourceful, are all good characteristics. Being able to deal with the ups and downs, adversity, the challenges of being in a startup are great. Where people have already built a network, a curated network of people, a curated network of potential customers. Those are all good things to have.
I would say entrepreneurs who are naturally curious tend to look at the world in a different way. So the natural curiosity plays into product development, go-to-market strategies, product market fit, how they build the culture of the company, that sort of thing. I think the other attribute is being a good listener, because everybody in Silicon Valley will give you feedback, whether you want it or not. And you're going to get a lot of conflicting feedback as an entrepreneur. Someone's going to say red, the other person's going to say blue, and you figure out, okay, neither one of those work for me. So the ability to listen and figure out what's best for your business rather than being swayed by what one VC might say versus the other. So I think curiosity and good listening skills are two of the things that I see entrepreneurs that are most successful and the ones that are most enjoyable to work with as well.
Okay. Again, I want to remind folks, If you're tweeting, it is hashtag Decoding Silicon Valley, and you can tweet directly to us at Royse University. And again, this is part of a series. We have our next two webinars coming up. We have the last one in the series is on employment law and employment issues in the gig economy. That's on October 19, followed by our last one this year will be disaster response and recovery on November 21. So we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank our two guests, our two authors, for being here today. This was certainly interesting. It's fascinating to figure out what makes this valley work, and it's great to see that someone has written a book on it to give you a how-to manual. So I want to also remind folks that if you'd like a copy of the book, it is available on Amazon, and it is Decoding Silicon Valley. John, is there any other way, anything else we'd like to tell folks about how they can get a copy of the book?
We give talks in Silicon Valley and all around the world, and if you think there's an opportunity for us to give a talk to a group or organization, we'd love to, and we love meeting entrepreneurs. We love signing books, so that's another opportunity as well.
Michelle, any comments about the book, about how to get it, where they might find it, why they should read it?
Well, I think it's a good resource for entrepreneurs and people here in Silicon Valley. So we've had a lot of people in Silicon Valley read it because they have fear of missing out. So we encourage everyone to take a look at the book. It's in a Kindle format, paperback, and hardcover. Oh, okay. And if we could support anyone with sharing these best practices, we're very happy to do so.
Yes, and I see that it is about 190 pages.
Yep.
Okay, so it's very doable in one long plane ride if you're going to Europe, I suppose. Okay, well, thanks very much. Thanks again for being here. Thank you, attendees. And with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude the webinar.